All right, we're back live tonight with you here on In Focus. Legal practitioners and members of the media are urged to show decorum in South Africa's courts of law. The call by the Legal Service Ombudsman Judge Siraj Desai comes as the justice system deals with high-profile cases which attract live broadcasts. Judge Desai also adds that there are many instances of legal breaches by court officials that often send a wrong message to the public about the profession. For more on this, we are joined now by Law Society of South Africa Vice President Joanne Anthony Gooden. Good to have you, Joanne, and thank you very much for your time. Is there a broad sense within the sector that the integrity of the courts are under threat?
Good evening, and thank you for having me on your program this evening. Yes, unfortunately, we do have problems within the legal profession with certain legal practitioners bringing the profession into disrepute, specifically with regards to their behavior in open court, specifically in the high-profile media cases, where we've had profanities, vulgar language, rude and disrespectful behavior, and that is mostly completely unacceptable when you look at the Code of Conduct, which is responsible for governing the way legal practitioners are supposed to operate in the legal sphere, and that's governed by the Legal Practice Act. Yeah.
Is it because we are traversing rather terrain that we've not been in before, where, for example, you've got really these high-profile cases that are now happening publicly in the media and are carried throughout, and where these mistakes now are beginning to show? Because somebody would have, I think, commented at some point to say, well, these are things that have always been happening in our courts. It's just that now it's happening on television, so it seems as if it's something new.
No, I don't agree with that, because I think that, first of all, bad behavior by a legal practitioner, being rude and disrespectful, or bullying and intimidating witnesses, not listening and showing due respect to the legal practitioners, your colleagues, as well as the presiding officer, that type of behavior has not been prevalent in the South African legal system. And I think that I don't think that it would be fair to say that we're seeing more of it because of these high-profile cases. The South African legal system, we don't have a jury. It's not a screenplay or a production where we need to create this impression that we are winning by being overly bullying in the courtroom. In the South African context, we have a presiding officer, whether it's a judge or a magistrate, that's going to make a legal decision based on the facts and the evidence presented. And there's no reason for the legal practitioner to stray outside of the boundaries of the Code of Conduct. So ultimately, we need to restore dignity to our courts. Yeah. Legal practitioners need to be brought back into the fold. Yeah. And I think that the presiding officers actually need to start taking a very firm stance against these legal practitioners that are overstepping the mark when it comes to the Code of Conduct. But
how strictly, sorry, let me just come in there, Joanne. How strictly has the LPC Code of Conduct been enforced in the past? And is there any particular reason why that enforcement has been lax in the last couple of events, I suppose, that you're pointing out?
Okay, well, that's actually a very, very good point. You must understand that prior to 2018, all attorneys were governed by the Attorneys Act. And in 2018, the Legal Practice Act came into being. And it's a very similar mechanism and a very similar piece of legislation. It just dealt with how the legal practice in itself was going to be regulated. Now, the legal profession is regulated by the Legal Practice Council, and any legal practitioner or any member of the public that has a complaint against a legal practitioner needs to raise a complaint with their local Legal Practice Council. Now, the province, each province in the country has a legal practice council, a provincial council. They have a local office. If you go onto the Legal Practice Council website, You'll find it's very user-friendly. Members of the public can actually go online and find a list of whether or not the person that they think is a legal practitioner is in fact a registered legal practitioner. Does that legal practitioner hold a valid Fidelity Fund certificate and has the right to appear in a specific court? So yes, the Legal Practice Council is cracking down on unscrupulous practitioners. They are dealing with complaints. We have disciplinary committees, investigating committees, and legal practitioners that are acting contrary to the Code of Conduct, contrary to the Legal Practice Act, are being taken to task to the extent that if they have overstepped the mark and the transgression is serious enough to warrant being struck from the role, they are struck from the role as legal practitioners.
What we have been seeing in South Africa is what others have termed lawfare, which is really an explanation to say we have political players who are now fighting their battles in court, and much of the tension around legal practitioners and their colleagues have been coming out in those particular spaces. For example, you will see the first time that we saw it, and maybe there were other instances, but certainly one that I can recollect at this time was during the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, where there was an incident where one of the legal representative representing one of the witnesses got into a heated debate with a fellow colleague and so on and so forth, and that became an issue that we needed to talk about. But of late, for example, we saw one legal practitioner and advocate who is said to have been struck off the roll, showing up in the court and saying to the judge, wait a minute, let me address you, and the judge saying, you're addressing me on what grounds? And things like that. And when you get into the heart of it, we get a sense that some of these matters have got a political tone that is driving them and making the tensions rise really high.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it comes down to what is the decorum of a legal practitioner. And the fact that a lot of them, and I must be very careful not to paint them all with the same brush, is that not all lawyers are dishonest. And, you know, these type of attorneys, I mean, if you simply look at what's happening with the road accident fund claims, and you look at malpractice suits, and you look at the statistics relating to the members of the public that are literally living from hand to mouth with their claims and their claims being stolen from them, it does paint us all as legal practitioners in a very harsh light. So ultimately, I think the bottom line as a member of the public is if you are looking at an attorney, you need to know that that attorney is supposed to maintain the highest standards of honesty and integrity. They are to maintain ethical standards prescribed by our code, and they've got to treat the interests of the client as paramount, provided that their conduct is subject to the best interests of the court. But most importantly, the point that you just raised is how you behave towards members of the public and your colleagues. Because first of all, the Code of Conduct is very clear that you have to treat your colleagues with fairness and respect and without any unfair discrimination. And you're not allowed to demean or belittle or insult your colleague. And they say that you must refrain from anything which might bring the profession into disrepute. And that kind of behavior, it's actually not even legal. It's more of a showcase of a bullying tactic to try and get your way. It's like throwing a tantrum as a small child. There's nothing legal about that. That's just not being on the right path and losing sight of the ultimate goal, and that is your code of ethics. And this is where the presiding officers, and I think this is what Judge Desai has said in his media statement, is that the judicial officers have got to start taking a firm stance against these legal practitioners that act in an inappropriate manner, and they bring the profession into disrepute. Yeah.
Are they not caught between a rock and a hard place or themselves, where they don't want to lose their cool, they don't also want to lose their decorum, and so judges sometimes you find they are lost for words in how they have to address this kind of behavior, particularly as it is happening publicly on television?
Absolutely, and I think it places the presiding officer in a very unfortunate position. But this is what we are seeing now in recent judgments and even older judgments. I actually went back and did a bit of research for you because I thought you might find it quite interesting about how judges in their judgments are actually making specific remarks in their judgments about the conduct of legal practitioners and issuing very firm warnings in the form of costs orders. For example, generally the legal principle is that if I'm the successful litigant, the judge is going to make the unsuccessful litigant pay my legal costs. But in certain instances, we are finding that the judges are saying, you know what? First of all, the conduct of the legal practitioner was unbecoming, and instead of that legal practitioner being entitled to a specific cost order, we are going to punish the legal practitioner, and in certain instances they've ordered that the legal practitioner may not even render an invoice to the client for that matter.
Wow. That is something. That is really, really something. Which, of course, takes us to the next area that Judge Desai is raising of excessive fees. Of course, we have been having a conversation around how the private practitioners themselves could really charge anything, because it does seem there is really no limit to what private practitioners can certainly charge. But is there something that governs the fees that legal practitioners would need to receive?
That's a very valid and a very good question, because I think a lot of people, you think of going to see a doctor, you're going to go and see a specialist, your medical aid's going to cover it, and it's for your health, you're quite happy to pay. Lawyers don't have that situation in place, and there's no tariff governing all sorts of legal fees. And basically, it boils down to that legal practitioners are entitled to charge a reasonable fee for their work. Our code of conduct specifically prohibits overreaching or overcharging. In any matter, a legal practitioner, if there's a dispute on the reasonableness of the fee, we have an organization. It's a person called a taxing master. It's in either the High Court, the Regional Court, or the Magistrates Court that can then tax a bill. That means that the bill must be presented, the source documents must be presented, and the taxing master is then going to assess whether the fee charged by that attorney is fair and reasonable. Even though there are no set tariffs for specific types of work because it's anti-competitive, that doesn't mean that legal practitioners can charge anything that they want to. I'll give you an example. If you are living in a very small rural town, the chances of you, if you had a very sophisticated commercial matter, being able to afford to pay 5,000, 6,000 rand an hour, it's unheard of. But in Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, there are senior commercial attorneys that's their hourly rate, and they will easily be able to get that rate paid to them. Whereas in the smaller areas, those rates are just completely unheard of. And it depends on the area, it depends on the nature of the work and the specialized nature of the work. For example, conveyancing, which is a transfer of property, immovable property, that's houses and flats and land, that is specifically regulated, and there are specifically conveyancing regulations and guidelines that lay out exactly what must be charged. So if a member of the public is of the view that they are being overcharged, they have got remedies. They can lay a complaint with the Legal Practice Council. They can demand that the bill be taxed. For example, if you've got a massive matter with somebody, they can't give you an invoice and says, to work done, 10,000 rand. You need to have an itemized, detailed accounting of what work has been done by that legal practitioner, and it's their duty, in terms of the code of conduct, to render you with a detailed, itemized account, which you can present for taxation.
Now, we are dealing with the current story here, as we wrap up, of an advocate representing a murderer and a rapist, he himself facing charges. Of course, I believe there is no law currently that would prevent him from representing this individual, certainly until he's convicted and found guilty in a court of law. But if you look at the integrity of the profession, certainly this is not a good advert, would you say?
Yes, I understand what you're saying. However, again, we have the presumption of innocence until you're proven guilty. And the fact that someone may have committed a rape or been found guilty of drunken driving or possession of drugs or whatever the nature of the crime is, it does not automatically result in them being no longer eligible to be a legal practitioner. To be a legal practitioner, you need to meet specific requirements regarding your qualification, being able to have specific practice management skills, and to have a valid Fidelity Fund certificate and deal with certain audit requirements. The fact that you may not be a fit and proper person, that is the test. And if it is found that you are no longer, by virtue of the crime, no longer fit to be a fit and proper person, for example, theft of trust money, which is a criminal act.
Yeah.
There are a large number of legal practitioners who are finding themselves struck from the role due to the fact that they are no longer fit and proper to be legal practitioners because of the allegation of theft and a guilty finding of theft.
Joanne, we could go on for the whole night, but I appreciate you. Thank you very much for coming on tonight. Lots and lots to still touch on there on this particular matter. That's Joanne Anthony Gooden, the Vice President of the Law Society of South Africa.